So as you know, I'm sure, today is Father Jeff's last Sunday with us. His last opportunity to stand here and offer the blessing that he has been and that he is and will be for the people where he's headed, to Sayville, New York, to be rector of St. Anne's Episcopal Church there. So I am interested at this point to link this unfortunate turn of events summer sermon series about what the heck, Lord, but that doesn't quite seem fair, much as I might want to do that. I just am really sad to see you go. I just am really sad to see you go. I've really enjoyed serving with you. I have enjoyed your creativity and your energy and your willingness to do anything, which is fabulous. And beyond that, it just has been with you, and I will miss that time together. So we didn't, really plan it this way, but it ends up being quite fitting, I think, that the Old Testament reading today happens on Father Jeff's last Sunday. Because if you've ever heard him teach discovery class or basically any other time he talks about the sacraments, you know that the sacrament of reconciliation is one of Father Jeff's great passions. And that's, I think, what this Joseph story is largely about. About reconciliation and the healing that it brings. Now, that being said, today's reading sort of loses a bit. We skipped over a whole lot of material between last Sunday's reading and this Sunday's reading. We learned last Sunday that the brothers envied Joseph enough to first want to kill him and then to end up selling him into slavery, because the thought that he, the youngest, was going to be lording it over his brothers in the future, and the brothers didn't really care for that too much. So I think it helps to fill in a little to understand how dramatic this reconciliation story today really is. So, you get 8 chapters of Genesis in 2 minutes. You can time me if you want. So like I said, instead of killing Joseph, the envious brothers just sell him off as a slave, which is pretty bad anyway. And he's taken to Egypt, where not only is he enslaved, but imprisoned falsely for 2 years. And there he interprets the dreams of 2 other prisoners, but the one he helps to free forgets about Joseph, doesn't help him out, until Pharaoh needs his own dreams interpreted. And Joseph is summoned from the dungeon to come up and tell Pharaoh that his dreams mean 7 years of bounteous harvests are coming, followed by 7 more years of famine. And Joseph goes on to say that Pharaoh needs a good administrator to steward this coming surplus and then to dole it out in the lean years. And sufficiently impressed by all this, Pharaoh promotes Joseph on the spot, making him his right-hand man. So the famine actually comes as forecast, and off in Canaan, the brothers and their household and all their father Jacob, they're all starving. So the brothers go off to Egypt to buy grain, because that's where the grain is. And they come, ironically, and bow before Joseph, the brother they tried to kill. They don't recognize him, but he recognizes them, and he launches this elaborate plan to imprison and enslave the brothers just like they did to him. Because after all, the brothers and their father and their households, they're all now dependent on Joseph for their very lives. He could have pulled the string, and had his brothers imprisoned or killed, but his heart melts instead, and we get to today's reading, the reconciliation. But, even here at the end of all that, it's not just a, happily ever after little story. I think three things are going on here that give us some guidance in our lives, in those places where we need reconciliation. First, in this situation where Joseph might reasonably have distanced himself from people who hurt him, he chooses to get closer instead. And second, he tells them the truth, hard as it might be for him to say and for them to hear. And then third, he moves out of the spotlight and sees that the story really isn't about him after all. So let's look at those. About getting closer, that's half a verse. I mean, the words are only half a verse in today's reading, but I think they make a great deal of difference in what's going on here. The reading begins with Joseph there, in his official role, the embodiment of royal power, and he says, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But the trappings of office, the crown and the jewels and the scepter and all, they get in the way of the brothers recognizing him. They can't make sense of saying till he says to them, "Come closer to me." And the brothers do. And they see that, they see Joseph for who he really is. And they remember. And that allows them to hear what comes next, which is the hard truth. Because Joseph says, "I am your brother, whom you sold into slavery." I mean, he makes the blame explicit. And at that point, the brothers are completely vulnerable. They don't know what's coming next. I mean, not only has the king's right-hand man accused them of stealing from him, but now he lets the second shoe drop and pronounces them guilty of an earlier crime much worse and much more personal. But I think that's the truth the brothers have to hear in order to understand, just how high the stakes are. Because without knowing the depth of Joseph's wound, they can't really appreciate what comes next, which is Joseph making the turn to reconciliation. Like I say, he could have had him killed, but instead he chooses to see the bigger story going on. He says, "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." And all that doesn't change, the brothers' betrayal or Joseph's enslavement or his years rotting in prison, but it does mean that there's more to the story than just Joseph's personal suffering. And it says, amazingly enough, that even a relationship broken this badly, God can use to save life. And Joseph says, that's hard. Good land, and he's giving them a gift of extended relationship with him. It's not going to be easy because reconciliation starts given moment, but forgiveness from that can take years. But still, they've started down the right road, and that road is really hard. I mean, reconciliation it's such hard work. It's some of the hardest work we do. It's so much easier, ironically, so much more comfortable to live in the discomfort we know and the discomfort of distance and alienation. And given that hard gospel reading we heard today, seems like maybe that was true for Jesus too. I mean, in the story of Jesus and the disciples and the Canaanite woman, you have to know that the Canaanites were not just foreigners to the people of Israel. They were enemies, long-term enemies. So over the centuries, the Israelites had taken land and judged them for worshiping the wrong gods, and the two sides had fought countless battles, and by Jesus' time, feud was still going on, at least in. So this Canaanite woman comes out, this enemy comes out and starts shouting at Jesus to heal her daughter. And remarkably, given what we know about Jesus, he doesn't answer her at all, the story says. In fact, the disciples urge him, "Send her away because she keeps shouting after us." And I imagine Jesus sort of caught there, looking at her and knowing the situation just isn't right. And and wrestling with the call that he's understood he's had, that he was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, not to people like her. But then, like Joseph with his brothers, the Canaanite woman makes this hard choice to come closer. She takes the risk to come right up to Jesus and ask him to save her little girl. And even then, the first words out of Jesus' mouth are pretty insulting. I mean, surely he didn't mean to hurt her this way, but he says, it's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. And the woman comes back with a truth that I think makes Jesus stop short. She said, our dogs, at least in your eyes. Maybe our lives don't matter. But, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. And Jesus, I think, is stung a little bit, and he relents, and he heals the woman's daughter. He chooses to enter into this moment, this opportunity for reconciliation, revealing, wow, God's love that crosses the boundaries even of violence. When this outsider comes close and speaks her truth, Jesus listens. And in that, I think, God's heart beats stronger than ever. Because there is power in that kind of connection, and power in the promise of reconciliation. I mean, if you know Father Jeff, you know that one of the gifts is an ability to hang in there when the emotional situation gets fraught. I just think that is one of the greatest things you have brought here, actually, is that presence. You're great at looking at you're great at looking that person in the eye and speaking the truth you know and staying in the game despite difference. And that disarming love changes things. In fact, I think it changes for people on both sides of that disagreement, because both sides, both people go away with the holy humility of learning that their truth is not quite complete. And that ability to live into that kind of reconciliation will serve you well in that next gig. It also serves the rest of us pretty well. I mean, hanging in there when we are tempted to pull back, that's a skill we need to be learning and living these days. We're making our way through uncharted territory right now as a nation, as a church, as St. Andrews. Part of that's about the pandemic. Part of that is about race. I mean, for generations, we've let race be the elephant in the national living room. And now the woman, people who've known for years that black and brown lives matter, that truth into the light and shouting, have mercy on us. And the Episcopal Church, I mean, you need to know, the Episcopal Church is fully on board that train. You see it seems like every comes out from Episcopal News Service and every communique from the House of Bishops. And I believe that's right. I think it's the right train to be on. I think it is right for people who look like me and faith communities that largely look like me to learn from the experience of those with whom we haven't typically built relationships and ask, okay, what do we need to do differently? That's what starts us on a journey of reconciliation. How hard it is to hear somebody else's truth. So that is true, I believe. And at the same time, regardless of which side we're on, anytime we know we have the right answer, I think that's when we've got to go build relationships with those who would give a different answer. I mean, I have had several people in this parish family come up to me and tell me that they feel like they can't speak their truth about racial justice or violence in our city, policing or incarceration or education. They say they feel they won't be heard because they question the narrative of racial justice. And I want to say to them, of course you can say that. Of course you'll be heard. But my wishing doesn't necessarily make it so. Instead, if we want St. Andrew's environment where we can talk about the various elephants in our living room, we have to do the work to make it that way. And we would not be alone in that work, I don't. We wouldn't be the first followers of Jesus to be struggling with things like this. I mean, here's a experiment from the gospel reading. Imagine what happens afterward. Imagine the unreported conversation among the disciples and Jesus, like around the fire that night, as they thought about what they had seen and heard from the Canaanite woman. You know, they must have been trying to make sense of what she had to say, that even though they saw her as a dog, God's justice demanded that she receive Jesus' healing power too. And as they talked, and tried to sort out their own feelings, what do you suppose Jesus did? I mean, don't you imagine he encouraged that conversation? I can't see him shutting down his friends for saying the wrong thing as they tried to make what they'd always thought about the Canaanites versus what they'd seen and heard that day. Okay, then, well, take it one step further. What if the Canaanite woman had come back wanting to join them as a follower of Jesus? The story's silent about what happens after the reading, so we don't know, what became of her. But what if she joined them? One of the many, mostly unnamed women who traveled along with Jesus. Wouldn't he have wanted that conversation to keep going? Wouldn't he have wanted his followers, including the new one, to listen to each other? And wouldn't he have wanted it to go uncomfortably deep? Come closer to me, Joseph said to the brothers who tried to kill him. Lord, help me, the Canaanite woman said to the Savior who first told her she wasn't one of his kind. Given the temptation to shut someone off or shut ourselves down, choose instead to come closer. That will be a choice. But then reconciliation always is.